À-bas-le-ciel.
If instead of asking, is marijuana healthy or unhealthy, we ask the question, is it a proven scientific fact that marijuana causes brain damage? The answer is, shockingly, horrifyingly, yes. It is a proven scientific fact that marijuana causes brain damage.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Hey guys, I'm recording this video on my weight bench in my workout room, my home gym, I guess you could say, just because the natural sunlight today is so bright that most of the other locations in my apartment, there's blinding white light coming through the windows. You can even see that in the background a little bit. This video is from my perspective about a very serious issue, and I'm sorry if I have to fill 10 minutes of your time with reading out formal, peer-reviewed academic articles, but I don't know any way to get across the seriousness of this information to the audience. And as boring or anticlimactic as it may be, I even think right now, to kick off this video, I have to cut straight to reading formal scientific opinion from a peer-reviewed scientific article, because there's no other way this video will be taken seriously by its audience. And that's a great shame, because the majority of people who watch this video will themselves be vegan. And if you're vegan, you've already been through a process of questioning many ostensibly real medical nutritional assumptions. Probably if you're a vegan today, at some point in the past, you believed that dairy milk was healthy, you believed that yogurt was healthy, or you may have even believed that it wasn't possible to live, it wasn't possible to survive without having dairy products in your diet. A lot of us grew up with these ideas, seeing them advertised, seeing them promoted by medical professionals, being told this by our teachers or parents or what have you. And at some point you turn the corner and you realize not only that this specific health claim is untrue, you can be healthy without any dairy in your diet, but the way in which selective facts can be presented out of context to be misleading more than they're false. Many of the health claims made for the dairy industry on behalf of milk and yogurt and what have you, they are true regarded in isolation. Dairy products do contain a lot of calcium. That's true. That's not a lie. But when you put the pieces together, when you look at the whole life cycle of a human being, when you look at the variety of health impacts under many different headings, it becomes clear that dairy is something you really overall would want to exclude from your diet. Now, to be honest with you, I feel that the case with cannabis, with marijuana, is much more one-sided and clear-cut. Because when we're talking about marijuana, we are fundamentally talking about brain damage. And I don't know anyone who wants to endure a moderate amount of brain damage. The optimal amount of brain damage is 0. So let's start by just quoting this peer-reviewed academic article. Conclusions. Cannabis seems to have been causally related to several instances of cerebral ischemia and infarction. Now, these are scary words. If you look it up in a dictionary, the real meaning of ischemia, which changes a little bit in context in medical literature, and infarction may surprise you. But this is stating very clearly, marijuana causes brain damage. So the video made by Mike the Vegan asked the question, is marijuana healthy or unhealthy? I don't know anyone who would approach this issue by saying that brain damage is healthy, or that brain damage is a type of health risk or disadvantage they'd be willing to dabble in. If instead of asking, is marijuana healthy or unhealthy, we ask the question, is it a proven scientific fact that marijuana causes brain damage? The answer is, shockingly, horrifyingly, yes. It is a proven scientific fact that marijuana causes brain damage. And that includes ischemia and infarction. In this context, ischemia means lack of blood flow within the brain, causing brain damage, causing cell death, causing other structural and functional problems in the brain. And infarction, it can mean an occlusion of any kind, so where the blood flow is blocked. In this case, it probably means where the blood flow is blocked by dead tissue. You can look up for yourself ischemia and infarction. The rest of this quotation is worth reading. Illicit drug use has been causally implicated in 6% of all cerebral infarctions in some hospital series 1 and 15 to 40% of infarctions in young patients. The connection between cannabis use and cerebral vascular disease is not as established. So it means you're not as well proven, not as established as that for other drugs, but this may be a result of an underreporting of cannabis-related events because of a general unawareness of a potential relationship. Because cannabis remains the most commonly used illicit drug, it may represent a modifiable risk factor. So this is what you have to expect in formal medical literature. It's not ringing alarm bells, and I think that many people who want to make excuses for the use of cannabis will ignore just how deadly serious the warning there is, because it is stated in the proper jargon, not overstating the certainty or expanding on the conclusions. This isn't propaganda. This isn't a reefer madness movie or anything like that. This is really stating very clearly it is a proven scientific fact that marijuana causes brain damage. Now, we can measure that brain damage more than one way. One of the ways that the brain damage is measured is by tests of the use of people's reasoning capacity. You sit people down and do intelligence tests, memory tests, performance-based tests of how well you can use your brain, how well the organ is functioning, as it were. Another way to measure brain damage is through magnetic resonance imaging scans, which is like a type of scan much more advanced than an X-ray. But if you don't know what MRI scanning is, you can imagine it as an X-ray, only much higher quality images that it produces, including 3D images and moving images of how the organ is functioning. And then third category to mention here, very un-vegan source information. We have information about the damage cannabis does to our brains through torturing rats to death, torturing animals in animal-based experimentation. Again, if you want to read every word of this, you can pause the screen, or you can follow up through the footnotes, find these articles, and read the studies in full. But I quote, "Learning and memory are often correlated with cellular changes within the hippocampus, and drugs or environmental factors which affect learning and memory will thus often induce observable morphological changes in the structure. In the current study, we investigate whether or not these changes could be related to structural changes within the hippocampus." Now, they do this through torturing a certain type of rat to death. And now if we skip down to the highlighted portion at the bottom, it says, "This work shows the potential for cannabinoids to influence hippocampal morphology. The pattern of changes may be similar to that seen after ischemic or toxic damage." Guys, if you don't know what this means, it's talking about brain damage. The hippocampus is one part of your brain that is damaged by cannabis use, that is damaged by THC. And as you're going to learn in this video, that is proven through animal experimentations and through MRI, magnetic resonance imaging scans on the human brain. Persistent behavioral effects resembling those of hippocampal brain lesions have been reported following chronic administration of marijuana or its major psychoactive constituent, THC, to rats. We used morphometric techniques to investigate the effects of chronic THC on the anatomical integrity of the hippocampus. The rats were dosed with THC, and then electron micrographs revealed a striking ultrastructural appearance and statistically significant decrease in the mean volume of neurons and their nuclei sampled from the hippocampal CA3 regions of rats treated with the highest doses of THC. A 44% reduction in the number of synapses per unit volume was demonstrated in these same rats. Skipping down to the concluding sentence, the hippocampal changes reported here may constitute a morphological basis for behavioral effects after chronic exposure to marijuana. I think it's deeply irresponsible and deeply dishonest for anyone to make a video talking about whether or not marijuana is healthy, purely in terms of the effects on your lungs, purely in terms of the chances of your getting cancer. Whether or not you get cancer from using marijuana may be a roll of the dice. Whether or not you get brain damage is not. Now, loss of memory function is a deadly serious issue, and for some reason when people talk about cannabis use, they make a joke out of it. I don't know anyone who's really willing to live with impaired memory function or would make that decision casually in terms of your health, in terms of your quality of life, in terms of your ambitions and aspirations. However, if you read this abstract, it sets out for you the frightening fact that the loss of memory function caused by THC, caused by cannabis use, it does correlate to brain damage that we can measure, physically real damage to the organ of the brain. And what did you think? Everyone accepts, there have been myriad tests and studies showing that cannabis impairs function of human memory. What did you think that was? A cultural change? Do you think that because people start smoking cannabis, they start listening to a different type of music, that culturally they start doing something that changes the function of their brain's memory? No. It's due to physically real damage to the organ of the brain. So this abstract begins by saying marijuana consumption elicits diverse physiological and psychological effects in humans, including memory loss. Skipping ahead to the final sentence here, these data suggest that some of the memory deficits caused by cannabinoids may be caused by THC neurotoxicity. Guys, if you read the whole quotation in full, what you're going to find is that this is talking about apoptosis, a word I don't use very often in English or in Latin. Neural apoptosis, neuron death, dead cells, dead tissue within your brain. It's not something to joke around about. It's not something to casually say is healthy. It's not something we can casually say, if used in moderation, will only cause effects you'll never complain of. Yes, there are some people who are dying of cancer who use marijuana or THC as a medicine. It may be less damaging to them than the other alternatives. There are people who use it as a painkiller, to use it to manage various incredibly serious medical conditions. I understand that. But if you're otherwise a healthy person using this as a recreational drug or for alleged psychological reasons, face facts. We're talking about brain damage. We're talking about dead cells, dead tissue inside your skull, impairing your memory's ability to function. Human beings are uniquely gifted within the animal kingdom at making excuses. I don't know any other species that's as good at making excuses as we are. Some people will claim that these brain damaging effects are only a problem if you keep using marijuana for 20 years. Well, here's a study that transpired over just 5 years, looking at morphological changes in the brain, changes in the substance of the brain itself, the shape and function of the brain, and it appeared just 5 years. A lot of people watching this video now have probably used marijuana for 5 years or more at some point in their life, whether or not they're doing so today. Guess what? In this period of 5 years, at the beginning, cortical thickness did not differ between patients and controls and between cannabis using and non-using patients. Over the follow-up period, we found excessive thinning of the right supplementary motor cortex, inferior frontal cortex, superior temporal gyrus, angular gyrus, occipital and parietal lobe in patients relative to controls after controlling for cannabis use. Sorry guys, I've studied a lot of languages, but modern Latin is not one of them. Patients who used cannabis showed additional thinning in the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, left anterior cingulate cortex, and left occipital lobe as compared to those patients that did not use cannabis during the scan interval. Guys, I can't take out a map of the brain and show you which parts of your brain those different Latin terms correspond to. Probably you watching this video can't either. Is there any part of your brain you would be comfortable with damaging for the mild form of high distraction and stress relief provided by marijuana? I don't think anyone's comfortable with any part of their brain enduring these kinds of structural and functional changes. The progress of science is slow, and in an area of research like this, where the use of magnetic resonance imaging is really quite expensive, it comes along step by step. But anyway, 2008, here we have this article using high-quality MRI imaging and proving, once again, as if there was any doubt, that yes, cannabis use does cause brain damage. Cannabis users had bilaterally reduced hippocampal and amygdala volumes. Right? You can read through all the details here about the precise location and nature of the brain damage. It's the type of research this is. Conclusions. These results provide new evidence of exposure-related structural abnormalities in the hippocampus and amygdala in long-term heavy cannabis users and corroborate similar findings in the animal literature. Now again, the progress of science is slow, but progress in one area tends to verify progress in another. In this case, the experiments that were done torturing rats to death is verified by directly scanning the human brain. Indeed, despite strong evidence of neurotoxicity in the animal literature, to our knowledge, no neuroimaging study has examined the neurobiologic consequences, sequelae consequences, of long-term heavy cannabis use while controlling for important compounds of polydrug abuse and co-occurring psychiatric disorders. So the authors are claiming here that their study in 2008 is a breakthrough, is really the first study to prove this point definitively. So if anyone tells you that there's no scientific evidence that cannabis causes brain damage, if you want to play that game, you can say, well, since 2008, that's simply not true. The only reason why I've taken so much time to read through evidence of this kind is because I know the tendency amongst my viewers. This was true even back when I only had a blog, when I was writing in text form, not making videos on YouTube, confronting people with the frightening reality of the impacts cannabis use has in their brain. Well, in some ways it comes as a shock to them, and in some ways it's tremendously familiar and they're used to making excuses for it. There are, by contrast, there are recreational drugs that people use to try to get higher scores on exams. The most common, of course, is something like caffeine, but also something like Adderall. Different drugs people who are studying for exams might use to increase their focus and during the period of studying, or their ability to retain their detailed memory of what they studied afterwards. This stuff is well known. I'm sorry, I'm not going to digress into this video. But it's interesting to note, people who use cannabis, whether they make excuses for it or not, none of them would claim that cannabis helped them to perform better on exams, to perform better academically, or that it enhanced, for instance, the process of learning a new language. And people do claim that about other drugs. There are other drugs, not talking about performance-enhancing drugs like steroids, there are other drugs that people use to help them have mental focus and clarity when lifting weights or doing other physical tasks, but mental tasks as well. On some level, I think that most people who use cannabis are accustomed to making excuses for what this article is attesting to, measuring that, in effect, quote, long-term cannabis users perform significantly less well than shorter-term users and controls on tests of memory and attention. They had worse memory, worse ability to pay attention. These results confirm that long-term heavy cannabis users show impairments in memory and attention that endure beyond the period of intoxication. Animal research suggests an important role for the cannabinoid receptor in regulating neural activity for memory processing, and the greatest impairment on almost every measure indicates generalized memory deficit with impaired learning, retention, and retrieval. In conclusion, our results confirm that cognitive impairments develop as a result of prolonged cannabis use. So on one level, people who use cannabis themselves, they experience this, they joke about it, they talk about failing a test, doing badly in school because of cannabis use. They're aware on the surface level of what cannabis use means. They may accept and even embrace and kind of celebrate the fact that it destroys their memory, their capacity to learn new things, their capacity for higher reason. Now, I don't know why that is. It's not a laughing matter. This is not something to joke about, whether it's yourself or your child or your cousin or your best friend, your husband, your wife. If there's anyone in your life using this drug, I would think that that loss of higher reasoning ability, capacity to learn new things, would concern you just as much as if you learned that they were huffing glue or snorting cocaine. Even though the effects of cannabis are subtle, they're tremendously negative. They'll impact your life short-term and long-term in exactly the way this study has just said. But it's interesting to me that people seem to very easily accept those surface measurements, the measurements of performance in how you use your brain, that they'll accept that, yes, there is memory loss. But then they'll be shocked when you tell them there's a biological basis for that memory loss, namely brain damage, including cell death, including changes that we can measure and, in a sense, photograph with MRI scans, changes in the actual shape and functionality of some lobes within the brain. So look, guys, this is not a joke to me. It's no laughing matter. I've known people, dozens and dozens of people, whose lives have been seriously negatively impacted by marijuana use. Maybe you do too. I'm not making this video to call Mike the Vegan an idiot. But Mike, you're an idiot. You've given advice to people that is, in effect, an excuse for their bad habits. In this video, you've raised spurious but true facts about marijuana in a way that convincingly distracts people from the overweening importance of the question of brain damage. I've seen that done before on the internet, and as I said at the start of this video, it's a method that vegans are familiar with from the dairy industry and the meat industry when they point to facts that are true, examined in isolation, but facts that are nevertheless misleading when compared to the gestalt, the many complex factors we need to put together to really understand whether the use of a drug or consuming of a food in our diet, whether it is healthy or unhealthy when looking at our life cycle as a whole. Mike the Vegan may be unaware of the extent to which he's doing this. He may be unaware that in his approach to cannabis, he's committing exactly the same crimes, exactly the same offenses that he points the finger at the dairy industry and the meat industry for committing. Mike, sincerely, I'd like to say to you, either take that video down or, you have my permission. You can upload this video on your own channel. You can deal with the peer-reviewed sources that are cited in this video. But Mike, I hope your fans send you this link. I hope you get the message. I hope you take seriously the fact that you've told tens of thousands of people to go ahead and inflict brain damage on themselves. That's something I would never do. Mike, I've been on YouTube before you came on the scene. I remember when your channel was small. You had your first few thousand viewers. I've seen your ascent to being an influential voice. With great power comes great responsibility. You should take responsibility for this. You should delete the video you've made or revise it or make a new video that takes seriously the fact that marijuana causes brain damage and that this is now a thoroughly attested, thoroughly proven fact.
À-bas-le-ciel.
All of the scientific sources used in this video were cited directly or indirectly in this article posted to my blog on Tumblr about 4 years ago. It's an article that got a big reaction at the time. I received a lot of email, a lot of very emotional reactions to it because my fellow vegans did not want to face up to this shocking but simple fact, including vegans who I knew at the time were smoking marijuana during pregnancy and absolutely certainly damaging the health of their own unborn child. Quote, vegans generally are people who have questioned and rejected the premise that yogurt was essential to their health, who have questioned many things they were told by parents, teachers, doctors, and marketing agencies. Vegans generally are people who have been willing to question cultural assumptions of what healthy means. Why would it be any harder for us to question the myths surrounding cannabis? It causes brain damage. There is proof.
À-bas-le-ciel.